Hello, and welcome back to Chronicles of the Abyss, the channel where we journey into the shadowed valleys of the human heart, exploring the stories that society often prefers to forget. We look for the why behind the unthinkable, the slow unraveling of a mind, and the moments where love twists into something monstrous. The story you are about to hear is a particularly harrowing one. It's a tale of a picture-perfect romance that concealed a dark, festering obsession. It's about the hundreds of tiny red flags that, when woven together, create a tapestry of terror. This is the story of a love that ended not with a goodbye, but with a final, brutal count of betrayal 60 times over. Before we descend into this chilling narrative, if you find value in these deep dives and want to support our exploration of these complex stories, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It helps the channel immensely and ensures you won't miss a single chapter of the tales we have yet to tell. You won't want to be left in the dark for this one. Now, pour yourself a drink, lower the lights, and prepare to meet Ethan and Clara. From the outside, they had it all. But inside their beautiful home, a storm was gathering, one that would end in a silent, blood-soaked scream. The world knew Ethan and Clara through the warm, golden filter of an Instagram feed. They were the couple everyone wanted to be. There was Ethan, with his easy smile and the kind, crinkling eyes of a man who laughed often. He was an architectural designer, a creator of beautiful, logical spaces, and his life seemed to be a reflection of his work. Well-structured, aesthetically pleasing, and built on a solid foundation. Then there was Clara, ethereal and captivating. She was a freelance artist, a painter of vibrant, chaotic abstracts that hinted at a depth of emotion as vast and untamed as the sea. Her social media was a curated gallery of their love. Candid shots of Ethan, his hair tousled by the wind on a hike, a close-up of their hands intertwined across a rustic cafe table, a time-lapse video of them assembling furniture in their new, sun-drenched apartment, their laughter a silent, sped-up ballet of domestic bliss. To their friends, they were Clara, a single, inseparable entity. They hosted dinner parties where the wine flowed as freely as the conversation, where Ethan would hold court with amusing anecdotes from his firm, and Clara would drift between guests, a magnetic, almost mystical presence, her hand always finding its way back to Ethan's shoulder, his arm, his waist. She was his anchor, his muse, he'd tell people with a proud, loving grin. He was her rock, her calm in the storm. She would whisper, her large, expressive eyes shimmering with what everyone took for adoration. Their apartment was a testament to their supposed synergy. His love for clean lines and minimalist design was the canvas. Her art, explosions of color and raw texture, was the soul. A stark white wall was made alive by a massive canvas of swirling indigos and furious crimsons. A sleek, Scandinavian-style sofa was softened by hand-woven throws she'd found at a flea market. It was a space that spoke of harmony, of two different worlds colliding to create a perfect whole. But a home, like a life, has corners that the light doesn't always touch. And in the carefully curated world of Ethan and Clara, the shadows were beginning to lengthen, unnoticed by all but the one who was being slowly enveloped by them. The first tremor, so minor it was barely perceptible, came on a Tuesday. Ethan had been working late on the final renderings for the Heston Tower, a project that could elevate his career from promising to prominent. He'd told Clara he would be home by 9, but a last-minute server crash at the firm had delayed everything. He texted her, of course. "Server's down. Everything's a mess. Might be another hour or so. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you." He finally stumbled through the door at 10:30, exhausted but buzzing with the adrenaline of a crisis averted. He expected to find Clara asleep, or perhaps reading in bed. Instead, she was sitting on the sofa in the dark, the only light coming from the cold, blue glow of the city skyline through their floor-to-ceiling windows. The vibrant painting on the wall behind her seemed to mock the stillness of the room. "Clara? Honey, you're still up?" he asked, dropping his briefcase with a heavy thud. She didn't turn. Her voice, when it came, was flat, devoid of its usual melodic lilt. "You're late." "I know. I'm so sorry. The servers went down. It was a total nightmare. I texted you." I saw your text, she said, her gaze fixed on the twinkling lights of the distant skyscrapers. Ethan flicked on a lamp, and the room was bathed in a soft, warm glow. He could see her face now. Her expression was unnervingly blank. There were no tears, no anger, just a chilling emptiness. He walked over and sat beside her, reaching for her hand. It was cold. It was really out of my control, he said gently. The whole team was there. You can ask Mark. Mark was his colleague and best friend, a boisterous, good-natured man who had been the first to sing Clara's praises when they started dating. She's a keeper, man, he'd said. The way she looks at you, it's like you're the only person in the universe. Clara finally turned to look at him. Her eyes, usually so full of life, were like dark, polished stones. Was Jessica there? The question caught him off guard. Jessica was a junior designer at the firm, bright, ambitious, and utterly professional. Yeah, of course. The whole project team was. Why? She likes you, Clara stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Ethan let out a small, tired laugh. What? No, she doesn't. She's just a kid, fresh out of college. It's her first big project. She looks up to me. That's all. She looks at you? Clara corrected him, her voice quiet but intense. When she thinks no one is watching. At the company picnic, she stood too close to you. He remembered the picnic. He'd spent most of it with Clara, but he did recall a brief conversation with Jessica about structural engineering software. He hadn't thought a thing of it. Clara, that's ridiculous. We were talking about work. You're imagining things. Am I? She asked, a flicker of something hurt, or maybe something sharp air in her eyes. Or are you just not seeing it? Maybe you don't want to see it. The conversation spiraled from there. It was like trying to navigate a maze made of smoke. Every logical point he made, every reassurance he offered, was met with a new, intangible accusation. He wasn't just late. He had chosen work over her. It wasn't a server crash. It was an excuse. It wasn't about his career. It was about his priorities, and she was clearly no longer one of them. The argument was a masterclass in emotional misdirection, and Ethan, tired and confused, found himself apologizing for things he hadn't done. He apologized for being late. He apologized for the server crashing. He apologized for how Jessica might or might not look at him. He apologized for making Clara feel insecure, for not being more attentive, for not loving her enough to leave work on time. By the time they finally went to bed, long after midnight, he was emotionally drained, while she was a storm of silent, wounded tears. He held her as she cried, whispering promises into her hair, feeling a profound sense of guilt, though he couldn't pinpoint his exact crime. The next morning, it was as if the storm had never happened. He woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and pancakes. Clara was in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune, dressed in one of his button-down shirts. She kissed him as if he were a soldier returning from war. I'm sorry about last night, my love, she said, her eyes wide and sincere. I miss you so much when you're not here. The apartment feels so empty. I get silly. And just like that, the incident was smoothed over, lacquered, and placed back on the shelf of their perfect life. Ethan, relieved, accepted her apology and the delicious pancakes. He dismissed the previous night as a bout of insecurity, a testament to the depth of her love for him. He loved her so much, he thought. He was lucky to have someone who cared so deeply. The coldness, the blank stare, the illogical accusations, they were aberrations. Tiny cracks in the otherwise flawless porcelain of their relationship. He chose to ignore them. It was easier that way. Weeks passed, and their life resumed its photogenic rhythm. But the cracks, once formed, never truly disappeared. They were just painted over. Ethan started making a conscious effort to leave work at 6 p.m. on the dot, sometimes passing off unfinished tasks to Mark. He declined after-work drinks with colleagues, knowing the questions it would raise with Clara. His world, once expansive, began to shrink, its borders defined by Clara's comfort. He didn't notice it happening at first. It was a gradual calibration, A text message asking who he was having lunch with. A call in the middle of the afternoon just to hear his voice, where she would casually ask who was in the background. She started picking him up from work, a gesture that seemed loving, but also effectively eliminated any unplanned detours or conversations. She explained it as wanting to spend every possible moment with him. How could he argue with that? It sounded like the very definition of romance. His friends noticed before he did. Mark, in particular, grew concerned. "Dude, we haven't hit the driving range in months," Mark said one afternoon, leaning against Ethan's desk. "The guys are asking if you've been put in witness protection. Let's grab a beer tonight. My treat." I can't, man," Ethan said, his eyes flicking towards the clock on his screen. "Clara would be downstairs in an hour. Clara's making that lasagna I love." "Rain check." Mark's easy smile faded slightly. "She's got you on a tight leash, huh?" Ethan bristled. "It's not a leash. We just like spending time together." "Is that a crime?" "No, but avoiding your friends is a misdemeanor, at least," Mark joked, but his eyes were serious. "Seriously, man, is everything okay? You seem stressed." "I'm fine," Ethan insisted a little too quickly. "The Heston project is just a beast. That's all." But it wasn't all. He was stressed. He felt a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety, the need to preemptively manage Clara's moods. He found himself carefully editing his day when he recounted it to her, omitting details that might be misconstrued. A casual chat with a female client, compliment from his boss, a harmless joke shared with Jessica in the break room. These small, normal interactions became potential landmines, capable of triggering another night of tearful accusations and his own subsequent, exhausting guilt. The control tightened its grip in subtle, insidious ways. She helped him manage his finances, suggesting a joint account for transparency, which meant she saw every transaction. A coffee bought near a part of town he wasn't supposed to be in could lead to an interrogation. She started disliking his friends. Mark was too boisterous and a bad influence. His college buddies were immature. His family, who lived a few states away, were judgmental. She would find fault in them, twisting their words, making him see slights and insults where none existed. She was isolating him, cutting the ropes that tethered him to his old life, one by one, all under the guise of protecting their special world. One Saturday, his sister called, excited about her recent engagement. After the call, Ethan was beaming. "That's great news," Clara said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "When's the wedding?" "Next summer. She wants us to come down a week early to help with the planning." Clara's expression tightened. "A whole week? But we were going to go to that art retreat in the mountains. I've already put a deposit down." Ethan had forgotten. In truth, Clara had mentioned it once in passing. "Oh, right. Well, this is my sister's wedding, Clara. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. We can do the retreat anytime." "So your sister is more important than us? Than a promise you made to me?" The emotional leap was breathtaking in its audacity. "That's not what I said." He started, but the familiar exhaustion was already setting in. He knew how this would end. It would be a long, circular argument that would leave him feeling like a terrible person, and he would eventually concede. That night, he called his sister back and made an excuse. He told her they could only come for the weekend of the wedding itself. The disappointment in her voice was a sharp pang in his chest. He hung up the phone and looked at his reflection in the dark window. The man looking back at him seemed tired, his smile a little less easy, the crinkles around his eyes now looking more like lines of worry. Behind him, Clara came and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his back. "Thank you for choosing us," she whispered, her voice a soft, victorious purr. "It proves you love me." He stood there, motionless, feeling the weight of her arms around him. It didn't feel like an embrace. It felt like a cage. A beautiful, gilded cage he had willingly walked into, mistaking the gleam of its bars for the warmth of the sun. And he was beginning to suspect, in a deep and terrifying part of his soul, that the door had just locked behind him. The gilded cage, once a metaphor, was becoming Ethan's tangible reality. The bars were no longer just the walls of their apartment. They were the invisible fences erected around his time, his thoughts, and his relationships. The love that had once felt like a warm, enveloping blanket now felt heavy, suffocating. Clara's moods were the weather system in which he lived, and he learned to be an expert meteorologist, constantly scanning the horizon for the slightest change in atmospheric pressure, the distant rumble of an approaching storm. The Heston Tower project, which should have been a source of immense pride, became a minefield of anxiety. Every late night, every weekend work session was a transgression that required a peace offering. He would bring home expensive flowers, her favorite pastries, or a piece of jewelry he couldn't really afford. These weren't gifts of love anymore. They were bribes for tranquility, payments on an emotional debt he never seemed to be able to clear. Clara's surveillance evolved from subtle questions to overt demands. She insisted on having the password to his phone, framing it as a matter of ultimate trust. "Couples with nothing to hide have no secrets," she'd said, her smile so sweet and reasonable that to refuse would have been to admit guilt. He'd given it to her, feeling a profound sense of violation as he did. From then on, he knew his texts, his emails, his call history were all subject to her scrutiny. He found himself typing and deleting messages to Mark, rewording simple pleasantries to female colleagues until they were sterile and impersonal. His digital life became as carefully curated as his public one. One evening, he was scrolling through a news feed on his tablet while Clara painted. An ad for a reunion at his alma mater popped up. For a moment, a wave of nostalgia washed over him, memories of late-night study sessions, football games, and the easy camaraderie he'd shared with a close-knit group of friends. He hadn't seen most of them in years. "Hey, look at this," he said, more to himself than to her. "My 10-year college reunion is coming up." From across the room, the rhythmic scrape of her palette knife on the canvas stopped. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meaning. "Are you thinking of going?" she asked, her back still to him. "I don't know. Maybe. It could be fun to see everyone," he said, already sensing the danger. He tried to keep his tone light. "Catch up with the old gang." She turned around slowly, wiping her crimson-stained knife on a rag. Her face was a mask of placid inquiry, but her eyes were drilling into him. "Who's the old gang?" "You know Mike, Dave, Sarah." He trailed off as he said the last name. Sarah had been his girlfriend for 2 years in college. Their breakup had been amicable, a simple drifting apart, and they hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. But he knew, with a sinking certainty, that this was the only name Clara had heard. "Sarah?" Clara repeated, the name sounding like a shard of glass on her tongue. "The one from your old photos? The blonde?" Before they had moved in together, Clara had gone through his old photo albums with an almost forensic intensity. He had thought it was cute at the time, her interest in his past. Now he saw it for what it was, reconnaissance. "Yeah, I guess she'll be there," he admitted, trying to sound casual. "Along with 100 other people. And you want to see her," Clara stated, her voice dropping to a low, accusatory whisper. "No, I want to see everyone. I haven't even thought about Sarah in years," he defended, his heart rate starting to climb. He was walking into a trap, and he knew it. "You're lying," she said, taking a step towards him. The red paint on her rag looked unervingly like blood. "You're still in love with her. That's why you keep those pictures. You're just waiting for a chance to go back to her." The accusation was so wildly disconnected from reality that Ethan felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. "Clara, that is insane. I love you. I am building a life with you. The pictures are from a decade ago. They're part of my history. Then why haven't you thrown them out?" she countered, her voice rising. "If she means nothing to you, why do you keep her face in a box under our bed?" "Our bed, Ethan." The argument raged for hours. It was a masterwork of gaslighting. She twisted his words, reinterpreted his past, and presented his nostalgia as a deep, personal betrayal of her. She cried, her body racked with sobs that seemed to tear through her, painting herself as the victim of his callous, lingering affections for an old flame. By the end of it, He was so mentally exhausted and disoriented that he found himself on his knees in front of her, begging for forgiveness. The next day, as a symbol of his recommitment, she watched, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable, as he took the old photo albums to the incinerator in their building's basement. As the thick, glossy pages curled and blackened, turning a decade of memories into gray ash, he felt a part of himself turning to ash with them. He wasn't just burning pictures of Sarah. He was burning pictures of his friends, his family, his youth. He was erasing his own history to appease her present. When he returned to the apartment, smelling of smoke, she kissed him, a long, deep kiss of ownership. "Now I know you really love me," she'd whispered. The isolation became a deliberate, strategic campaign. When his mother called, Clara would hover nearby, her presence a silent pressure on the conversation. After he hung up, she would dissect the call. "Did you hear her tone? She doesn't think I'm good enough for you. She asked if you were eating well. She's implying I don't take care of you." She planted seeds of resentment, watering them daily until Ethan began to pull away from his own family, keeping his calls with them short and superficial to avoid the inevitable inquisition that would follow. Mark was the last bastion of his old life, and Clara seemed to reserve a special venom for him. She saw him as the biggest threat, the one person whose opinion Ethan still valued. She started engineering situations to create a rift between them. One Friday, Mark was supposed to come over for their traditional pizza and video game night. An hour before he was due to arrive, Clara suddenly doubled over, complaining of excruciating stomach pains. She was pale and trembling, and Ethan, panicked, rushed her to the emergency room. He texted Mark, canceling in a flurry of apologetic messages. They spent 6 hours in the ER. The doctors ran a battery of test blood work, an ultrasound, a CT scan. They found nothing. By the time they were discharged, with a diagnosis of a likely stress-induced stomach cramp and a recommendation to take an antacid, it was 2 a.m. The next day, Mark called. "How is she? Is she okay?" "Yeah, she's fine now," Ethan said, rubbing his sleep-deprived eyes. "They couldn't find anything. False alarm, I guess." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A false alarm?" Mark's voice was tight with skepticism. "Ethan, you said she was in agony." "She was. You didn't see her. It just seems convenient," Mark said carefully. "Happening right before I was supposed to come over." Clara chose that exact moment to walk into the room. Ethan's entire body tensed. "What are you trying to say, Mark?" he whispered into the phone. "I'm saying she's playing you, man. She didn't want me to come over, so she faked a medical emergency. Can't you see it? You think she faked it?" Ethan's voice rose, a mix of disbelief and defensiveness. "I was with her. She was in real pain." "Was she?" Mark pressed. "Or did she just put on a really good show?" "Open your eyes, Ethan. She's cutting you off from everyone. Me, your family, everyone. This isn't healthy." From across the room, Clara's eyes narrowed. She had heard. "You know what, Mark? I don't need this," Ethan snapped, his fear of Clara's wrath overriding his loyalty to his friend. "You're supposed to be my best friend, not some conspiracy theorist. I have to go." He hung up, his hand shaking. He turned to face Clara, bracing himself. Her expression was one of profound, theatrical hurt. Tears welled in her eyes. "He hates me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I knew it. He's trying to turn you against me. He wants to destroy us." "No, he's protective. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand that you love me? He doesn't understand that we're happy?" she sobbed, collapsing onto the sofa. "He's jealous. He wants you all to himself." That night, she convinced him that Mark was a toxic presence in their life. She replayed the phone call, twisting Mark's concern into malicious intent. By morning, Ethan, thoroughly brainwashed and desperate for peace, had sent his best friend a curt, dismissive text, telling him he needed space. Mark's hurt and angry reply went unanswered. The final rope had been cut. Ethan was now an island, with Clara as its sole, self-appointed ruler. He thought that, with the outside world successfully walled off, there would be peace. He was wrong. With no external targets for her jealousy and paranoia, Clara's focus turned inward, onto him, with an intensity that was terrifying. She began to criticize him constantly: his job, his hobbies, the way he dressed. The architectural models he once built with passion in his spare time were now a childish mess. His love for old black and white films was pretentious. His favorite worn-out sweatshirt was disgusting. These were not suggestions. They were verdicts on his character, designed to chip away at his self-esteem, to make him feel unworthy of love from anyone but her. He started keeping a journal. It was a small, black moleskine notebook he kept hidden in a loose floorboard under his desk. He didn't know why he started it. Perhaps it was a desperate attempt to hold onto his own sanity, to document the reality that Clara was so adept at warping. He wrote down the arguments, the accusations, the things she had said. October 12th. Cried for an hour because I liked a female colleague's photo of her new puppy on Facebook. Said it meant I was thinking about her and that I wanted a life with her instead. I had to delete my entire account. November 2nd. Accused me of having an affair with the barista at the coffee shop because she smiled at me. We had to find a new coffee shop. The new one is a 20-minute walk in the wrong direction. November 28th. Threw a plate against the wall because I said her new painting was nice instead of breathtaking. Said I didn't appreciate her soul. Spent the rest of the night on the couch. Reading his own entries was like reading the logbook of a man slowly going insane. The incidents seemed so petty, so absurd when written down, yet in the moment, they were his entire reality. He was living in a constant state of high alert, his nervous system frayed. He lost weight. Dark circles formed under his eyes. At work, people commented on how tired he looked. He would just blame it on the Heston Project, the convenient all-purpose excuse for the slow-motion collapse of his life. The breaking point, the moment the cracks shattered the entire porcelain facade, came on a rainy Thursday in December. He had finally completed the Heston Tower project. It was a monumental achievement. His boss had called him into his office, shaking his hand vigorously and announcing a significant promotion and a substantial bonus. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a genuine spark of his old self, a flicker of pride and excitement. He couldn't wait to tell Clara. He imagined a rare night of celebration, a reprieve from the constant tension. He walked into the apartment, soaked from the rain but beaming. "Honey, I have the most amazing news." Clara was standing by the window, staring out at the rain-streaked city. She was holding his phone. His heart plummeted into his stomach. "What were you doing on a jewelry store website, Ethan?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. He was confused. "What? I haven't been on any jewelry store website." She turned the phone to show him. The browser history was open to the website of a well-known, high-end jeweler, the page open to a selection of diamond engagement rings. "This wasn't me," he said, his mind racing. He hadn't looked at rings. He hadn't even contemplated it. The thought of marrying Clara, once a beautiful daydream, now felt like a life sentence. "Don't lie to me," she shrieked, her composure shattering like glass. She hurled the phone across the room, where it hit the wall and clattered to the floor. "Who is she? Is it Jessica? Are you going to leave me for her? You were going to use your bonus to buy her a ring, weren't you? Clara, I swear, I don't know how that got there. Maybe I clicked on an ad by mistake," he pleaded, but he knew it was useless. She was in a full-blown paranoid delusion. "A mistake!" she screamed, her face contorted with a rage he had never seen before. It was pure, unfiltered madness. Her eyes were wild. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't see what you're doing? You're trying to leave me, after everything I've given up for you, after I made you my whole world." She lunged at him, her nails scratching at his face. He stumbled back, shocked, raising his arms to protect himself. He felt a sharp sting on his cheek. She hit his chest with her fists, her blows weak but furious, a desperate, frantic assault. He grabbed her wrists to stop her. "Clara, stop it. You're not making any sense," he yelled, his voice cracking. For a moment, she froze, her chest heaving. The wild rage in her eyes was replaced by something else, something colder and more terrifying. It was a look of utter contempt. Her mask didn't just slip, it disintegrated. And in that moment he saw her. He saw the real her, the person who had been lurking beneath the artist, the lover, the victim. He saw the vast, empty darkness behind her eyes. He let go of her wrists. His cheek was bleeding. The apartment, their beautiful home, suddenly felt like a tomb. The air was thick and toxic. He knew, with a clarity that was as paralyzing as it was liberating, that he had to get out. Not later. Not tomorrow. Now. I'm leaving, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He expected more screaming, more tears, more accusations. Instead, an eerie calm settled over her. She straightened her clothes, a small, strange smile playing on her lips. No, she said softly, her voice returning to its melodic, gentle tone. You're not. She turned and walked towards the kitchen. Ethan, dazed and bleeding, stood frozen in the living room. He thought she was getting a glass of water, or perhaps leaving the room to give him space. He heard a drawer slide open, the metallic rattle of utensils. He took a step towards the door, his mind finally screaming at him to run. He never made it. He heard her footsteps behind him, unnaturally quiet. And then, the first searingly hot pain erupted in his back, just below his shoulder blade. It was a shock, so profound and absolute that for a second, he didn't even understand what it was. He thought she had punched him, a hard, sharp blow. But then he felt the warmth spreading through his shirt, and he heard her whisper, her voice right next to his ear, a sound of venomous intimacy. If I can't have you, she breathed, no one can. And then she pulled the knife out and stabbed him again. And again. The longest night of his life had just begun. The first plunge of the blade was a bolt of pure, white-hot shock. It wasn't like the movies. There was no dramatic gasp, no eloquent final words. There was only a profound, biological betrayal as Ethan's own body registered the catastrophic intrusion. His mind, still reeling from the psychological warfare of the past hour, couldn't immediately process the physical reality. He felt a sharp, searing pain, followed by a bewildering warmth that bloomed across his back and soaked through his shirt. He staggered forward, a clumsy, uncoordinated step, his hand flying to the spot as if to ward off a mosquito. His fingers came away slick and dark. He turned slowly, his movements sluggish, his brain struggling to bridge the gap between the argument about a jewelry website and the cold, hard steel that had just violated his flesh. He saw Clara, but it wasn't the Clara he knew or the one he thought he knew. The woman standing before him was a stranger, an imposter wearing Clara's face. The mask of the wounded artist, the insecure lover, the tearful victim, it was all gone, burned away to reveal something primal and terrifying. Her eyes, usually pools of expressive emotion, were wide and terrifyingly vacant, yet glinted with a feverish, triumphant light. Her lips were pulled back in a grimace that was almost a smile. In her hand, she held a long, slender knife from the butcher block in their kitchen. It was the one they used for carving roasts. The blade dripped with his blood, a single, thick crimson tear that fell silently onto the pristine white oak floor. Clara? He breathed, the name a puff of confused air. What? She didn't answer. She lunged again. This time he saw it coming. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded his system, cutting through the shock. He threw up his arm to block, and the knife sank into the fleshy part of his forearm. The pain was different this time, sharper, more defined. He cried out, a raw, guttural sound of agony and disbelief. This was real. This was happening. He shoved her away hard. She stumbled backward, her bare feet slipping on the blood that was now beginning to pool on the floor. She didn't fall. She caught her balance with an unnatural, feline grace, her eyes never leaving his. She was breathing heavily, not with exertion, but with a kind of ecstatic anticipation, like a predator that had finally tasted blood. Ethan's mind fractured into 1,000 panicked thoughts. Run. Get out. The door. The phone. Scream. Help. He backed away, his wounded arm held tight against his chest, his eyes locked on the gleaming, bloodied knife. The living room, once his sanctuary, was now a combat arena. Every piece of furniture was an obstacle. The sleek coffee table he had so carefully chosen was now a barrier he had to navigate. The floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city now seemed like a mocking audience to his private horror show. "Clara, please," he begged, his voice hoarse. "Stop this. We can talk. Just put the knife down." Her head tilted, a gesture of mock curiosity. "Talk?" she said, her voice a low, guttural parody of her usual tone. "We're done talking, Ethan. You were going to leave me. You were going to throw me away like I was nothing." "No, I wasn't. I was just upset." "We can fix this," he lied, his gaze darting towards the front door. It was 10 feet away, an impossible distance. "Fix this." She let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. It was a sound of broken glass. "You broke it. You broke us. You looked at her. You thought about her. You made a choice." She moved towards him, not with a rush, but with a slow, deliberate stalking motion. He continued to back away, his feet clumsy, his body screaming in protest. His back hit the cool, hard plaster of the wall. A dead end. He was trapped. Panic gave way to a primal survival instinct. He wasn't an architect anymore. He wasn't Clara's boyfriend. He was a cornered animal. As she raised the knife again, aiming for his chest, he kicked out, his foot connecting with her knee. There was a sickening crack. She cried out, a genuine shriek of pain this time, and her leg buckled. He didn't wait. He scrambled sideways, his objective singular, the door. He fumbled with the complex, designer lock they had installed. His hands were slick with his own blood, and the smooth metal offered no purchase. He could hear her behind him, grunting with effort as she pushed herself up. The sound spurred him on. He finally managed to turn the deadbolt. He yanked the door open. Freedom was a brightly lit hallway. He never crossed the threshold. A searing pain exploded in his lower back. It was deeper, more savage than the others. His legs gave out from under him, and he collapsed onto the floor, half in the apartment, half in the hallway. He tried to crawl, his fingers clawing at the smooth tiles of the corridor, but his body wouldn't obey. He felt a hand grab him by the collar of his blood-soaked shirt and drag him back inside. The door slammed shut with a deafening boom, plunging the entryway into semi-darkness. The deadbolt clicked back into place. His last hope was extinguished. He rolled over, his body a symphony of agony. Clara stood over him, her face a mask of sweat and fury, her leg bent at an unnatural angle. The pain from her injury seemed only to fuel her rage. She was no longer just attacking him. She was trying to annihilate him. She fell upon him. It wasn't a fight anymore. It was a butchering. The knife rose and fell with a terrifying, rhythmic intensity. He tried to fight back, to block, to push her away, but his strength was fading with every new wound, with every fresh wave of blood that left his body. The stabs were no longer precise. They were frantic, chaotic, a frenzy of pure, undiluted hatred. The blade found his stomach, his chest, his shoulders. He felt a sharp, piercing agony in his side that made it impossible to breathe. Punctured lung. He could hear a horrifying gurgling sound with every ragged gasp he took. His vision started to blur at the edges, the scene dimming as if someone were slowly turning down the lights on his life. Through the haze of pain and fading consciousness, he saw her face. Her hair was matted with his blood. Her beautiful features were twisted into a grotesque mask of exertion and madness. And she was talking to him, her words a running commentary to his execution. "You did this. Stab. You made me do this. Stab. You never loved me. Stab. Not like I loved you. Stab. No one will ever leave me again. Stab." Each word was punctuated by a fresh wound, a new violation. The pain became a constant, a white noise that drowned out everything else. His life didn't flash before his eyes. There were no fond memories, no cinematic farewells. There was only the brutal, visceral reality of his own destruction. His last coherent thought was not of love or regret, but of a profound, soul-crushing bewilderment. Why? He didn't know which wound was the final one. The world simply dissolved. The pain ceased. The frantic motion above him stopped. The terrible, rhythmic stabbing ended. There was only darkness, and then a profound and final silence. For a long time, Clara sat astride his body, the knife still clutched in her hand. The only sounds in the apartment were her own ragged, gasping breaths and the steady drip, drip, drip of blood onto the floorboards. The Crimson Symphony had reached its crescendo and was now fading into a quiet, horrific aftermath. The storm of her rage had passed, leaving behind an absolute, devastating calm. She looked down at what she had done. Ethan's body was a canvas of her fury. His clothes were shredded and soaked through, more red than their original color. His face, once so handsome and kind, was pale and slack, his eyes open and staring sightlessly at the ceiling. The beautiful apartment, their carefully constructed love nest, was now a slaughterhouse. Blood was everywhere. It was on her, on him, on the floor, splattered across the white walls and the sleek, modern furniture. A large, abstract splash of it had even reached her painting, adding a final, gruesome stroke of crimson to the canvas. She didn't feel remorse. She didn't feel horror. She felt empty. The all-consuming fire of her jealousy and rage had burned itself out, leaving behind only cold, gray ash. The man she had professed to love, the man she had made the center of her universe, was gone. And she had been the one to erase him. Slowly, stiffly, she pushed herself off his body. Her knee screamed in protest, a sharp reminder of his brief, futile resistance. She limped through the carnage, her bare feet leaving red footprints on the floor. She went into the bathroom and looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who stared back was a monster from a nightmare. Her face was streaked with his blood. Her eyes were wide and black, the pupils dilated. Her hair was a tangled mess. She looked at the reflection for a long, silent moment, as if trying to recognize herself. Then, with a chillingly calm deliberation, she turned on the shower. She stripped off her blood-soaked clothes, letting them fall to the floor in a heap. She stepped under the hot spray, the water turning pink and then red as it swirled around her feet and down the drain. She scrubbed at her skin, methodically, relentlessly, as if she could wash away not just the blood, but the act itself. She washed her hair, her face, her hands, paying special attention to the spaces under her fingernails. When she stepped out of the shower, clean and pale, she felt a strange sense of clarity. The chaotic, emotional storm was over, and now a cold, clear logic took its place. She had a problem, a body, a crime scene. She needed a story. Her mind, which hours before had been a tempest of paranoid delusion, was now a machine of ice-cold calculation. She thought about what to do, her thought process methodical and precise. A break-in, a robbery gone wrong. It was a classic. It was believable. She moved through the apartment with a new purpose. She put on a pair of latex gloves from under the kitchen sink. She took the bloody knife and washed it thoroughly, scrubbing it until it gleamed, before placing it back in the butcher block. She gathered her blood-soaked clothes and the rag she had used to wipe her hands and sealed them in a garbage bag. Then she began to stage the scene. She opened a window in the living room, letting the cold, rainy night air in. She took a heavy vase and smashed it on the floor. She went to her jewelry box and emptied its contents into a pillowcase, along with Ethan's watch and wallet. After wiping them clean of any blood, she tipped over a chair. She made the apartment look violated, ransacked. It was a performance, and she was the director, the set designer, and the star. Her final touch was herself. She needed to look like a victim. She took a small, sharp piece of the broken vase and deliberately, carefully, drew a shallow cut along her own arm. She winced at the sting, a small price to pay for authenticity. Then she went back to Ethan's body. It was the hardest part. She had to touch him again. She knelt beside him, her clean skin a stark contrast to his savaged form. She smeared some of his blood on her own face and clothes. Finally, she took her phone, the one she had thrown against the wall earlier, its screen now a spiderweb of cracks. She sat on the floor, a safe distance from the body, leaned her back against the sofa, pulled her knees to her chest, and took a deep, shuddering breath. She practiced the scream in her head, pitching it just right, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror and grief. She pressed the 3 numbers. 911. When the operator answered, Clara unleashed the scream she had rehearsed. It was a masterpiece of manufactured hysteria. "Help me! Oh God! Please help me!" she shrieked into the phone. "Someone broke in. They hurt him. They hurt my Ethan. There's so much blood." She let the phone drop to the floor, her sobs convincing, racking, and utterly, monstrously false, echoing through the silent, blood-soaked apartment. The performance had begun. The first to arrive were 2 patrol officers, a veteran with tired eyes named Miller and his young, sharp-faced partner, Chun. They had been briefed by dispatch. A possible home invasion, a female caller hysterical, a male victim assaulted. They came prepared for chaos, but the scene that greeted them in apartment 12B still managed to send a jolt through their practiced composure. The door was ajar, as Clara had left it after her frantic 911 call. They entered with weapons drawn, announcing their presence. "Police! Anyone in here?" The first thing that hit them was the smell. The coppery, metallic tang of blood was so thick in the air it was almost a taste. The second was the visual tableau. The living room was a mess of overturned furniture and shattered glass, classic signs of a violent struggle. Then they saw the body. Ethan was lying face down in a vast, dark pool of his own blood that had begun to congeal on the hardwood floor. Even from the doorway, the sheer brutality of the attack was evident. His back and shoulders were a latticework of deep, vicious wounds. It was overkill, a fact that registered instantly in Officer Miller's experienced mind. Robbers were usually efficient. They were in and out. This was personal. Then they saw her. Clara was huddled against the far wall, her knees drawn to her chest, her body shaking uncontrollably. She was wrapped in a pristine white bathrobe that was starkly, artistically, smeared and streaked with blood. Her hair was wet and stringy, her face pale except for a dramatic bloody handprint on her cheek. A shallow, clean-looking cut was visible on her forearm. She was looking at Ethan's body, her eyes wide with a horror that, to a casual observer, looked utterly authentic. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Miller. Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Clara's head snapped towards them. She let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. "He's not moving," she wailed, her voice a perfect symphony of grief and terror. "I came out of the shower. I heard a noise. I saw a man, a shadow. He ran out the window, and then I saw Ethan." She dissolved into another round of racking sobs, burying her face in her hands. Chun moved cautiously through the apartment, clearing the other rooms, while Miller knelt a safe distance from Clara. "Ma'am, did you see the man's face?" "No, it was too dark. He was just big," she stammered between sobs. "He took my jewelry. Ethan's watch. Oh God, Ethan." It was a textbook victim statement. She was hysterical, disoriented, focusing on the emotional trauma rather than concrete details. Paramedics arrived moments later, and the apartment became a flurry of controlled activity. They pronounced Ethan dead at the sine formality, given the catastrophic nature of his injuries. As they carefully turned his body over, even the hardened first responders flinched. The front of his torso was even worse than the back. He had been stabbed dozens of times. The call went out. This was no longer a simple B&E. This was a homicide, and that meant it belonged to Detective Isabella Rossi. Rossi was a woman in her late 40s who had seen the worst of humanity so many times that she had become an expert in its language. She was methodical, observant, and possessed a bullshit detector that was legendary within the department. She arrived on scene an hour later, stepping into the apartment that was now a web of yellow tape and forensic technicians. She took it all in, her sharp, dark eyes missing nothing. She saw the ransacked room, the shattered vase, the body. She listened to Miller's initial report, nodding slowly. Then she looked over at Clara, who was now sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, a paramedic trying to check her vitals. Rossi watched her for a full minute before approaching. Clara's performance was still in full swing. She was trembling, weeping, answering the paramedic's questions in a tiny, broken voice. Rossi noted the cut on her arm, a straight, deliberate-looking line, not the jagged tear you'd expect from a struggle. She noted the wet hair and the bathrobe, odd choice of attire for someone who claimed to have just gotten out of the shower and walked into a life-or-death struggle. Most people would grab a towel. She noted the blood smears on Clara's face and robe. They looked more like finger paintings than the random spatter of a violent encounter. "Mississippi Mitchell, is it?" Rossi began, her voice calm and even, devoid of the cloying sympathy Clara had received so far. "I'm Detective Rossi. I'm very sorry for your loss. I need to ask you a few questions if you're up to it." Clara looked up, her large, tear-filled eyes radiating victimhood. I'll try." Rossi pulled up a chair, creating an island of calm in the chaotic crime scene. "Tell me what happened. From the beginning." Clara recounted her story, her voice choked with emotion. The narrative was polished, almost cinematic. The romantic evening in. The relaxing shower while Ethan worked on his laptop. The faint sound of a crash from the living room. Her initial thought that he had just dropped something. The creeping fear. Peeking out of the bathroom to see a dark figure rushing past. The glimpse of the open window. And then, the discovery of Ethan, lying on the floor. Rossi listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. "You said the man ran out the window?" "Yes," Clara whispered. Rossi glanced at the window. It was a second-story window, but it opened onto a fire escape. "Plausible. And you didn't see his face at all?" "No, it all happened so fast. He was wearing dark clothes, a hoodie, maybe. And he attacked you?" Rossi asked, gesturing towards the cut on Clara's arm. I don't think so," Clara said, looking at her arm as if seeing it for the first time. "It must have happened. In the confusion. Maybe I brushed against the broken glass on the floor when I ran to Ethan." It was a good answer. A smart one. It explained the clean cut. Rossi was impressed. This wasn't your average, panicked witness. This was someone who was thinking. "So the intruder didn't touch you at all?" Rossi pressed. "He attacked your boyfriend with. What did he use? A knife?" The forensic team had already identified the murder weapon as a knife, but it was nowhere to be found. I don't know," Clara stammered. "I didn't see a weapon. But he stabbed Mr. Miller over 60 times, Rossi stated, her voice flat, delivering the horrific fact with the emotional weight of a weather report. She was watching for a reaction. Clara's face crumpled. A fresh wave of seemingly authentic grief washed over her. 60? She choked out, her voice a strangled whisper. "Oh God! Oh, my poor Ethan!" She began to sob again, this time so violently that the paramedic had to put a steadying hand on her shoulder. It was a powerful performance. But Rossi wasn't the audience. She was the critic. And she was noticing the flaws. The story was a little too perfect, the emotions a little too telegraphed. But more than anything, it was the crime scene itself that was speaking to her. And it was telling a very different story. The sheer number of stab wounds screamed of a crime of passion. This wasn't the work of a startled burglar. This was rage. This was personal. The ransacking felt staged. Valuables were strewn about, but the high-end electronics, a large flat-screen TV, a new laptop, expensive speakers were untouched. A thief in a hurry would grab the easiest, most valuable items. This thief had apparently taken the time to empty a jewelry box and overturn a chair, but ignore a $5,000 entertainment system. It didn't add up. Rossi left Clara with the paramedic and went to confer with the head of the forensics team, a wry, meticulous man named Dr. Evans. "What have you got for me, Dave?" Evans pointed with a gloved finger. No signs of forced entry on the door or the window. The window latch was unlocked from the inside. Our perp either walked in through an unlocked door or was let in. That was big. It undermined the entire stranger broke-in narrative. What about footprints on the fire escape? It's been raining all night. Anything that was there is washed away. Convenient for our killer. And the murder weapon? Still missing. But based on the wound patterns deep, narrow-re looking for something like a stiletto knife or a long, thin kitchen knife. A carving knife, maybe. Rossi's gaze drifted towards the pristine kitchen, where a handsome wooden butcher block sat on the counter. It was full of knives. Too full, perhaps? It was impossible to tell if one was missing just by looking. And this is the interesting part, Evans continued, leading her towards the bathroom. Take a look at the drain in the shower. He shone a UV light into the drain. A faint luminescence appeared. Luminol is picking up trace amounts of blood. Someone washed a significant amount of blood down this drain. And recently, Rossi felt a cold certainty begin to settle in her gut. She pictured the scene. Clara, with her freshly washed hair, her clean body in a bathrobe, with only curated, strategically placed blood smears on her. The real question was what was underneath. Rossi's eyes scanned the apartment one more time, her mind piecing together a new, darker narrative. No forced entry. A crime of extreme personal rage. A missing murder weapon, likely a kitchen knife. A shower used for a bloody cleanup. A suspect with a story that was just a little too neat and a performance that was just a little too good. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. Rossi was sure of it. This was a domestic dispute that had escalated into a massacre. The monster they were looking for hadn't climbed in through the window. She had been inside the apartment all along. And Rossi now had a name for her. She looked at Ethan's brutalized body, covered now by a sheet. "All right, Mr. Miller," she whispered to the victim. "Let's find out what really happened tonight." The hunt wasn't for a shadowy figure in a hoodie. The hunt was for the truth. And she suspected it was hidden behind the beautiful, tear-streaked face of Clara Mitchell. The interrogation room at the 12th precinct was a small, soundproofed box designed to amplify discomfort. It had beige walls, a scuffed metal table, and 3 chairs. There were no windows. It was a place where lies came to die. Clara sat in one of the chairs, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders like a royal mantle of grief. She had been at the station for 3 hours, waiting. The delay was deliberate, a classic tactic designed to let a suspect's adrenaline wear off and their anxiety fester. Detective Rossi entered the room, holding a slim folder. She didn't bring a partner. She wanted this to be intimate. She sat down opposite Clara, placing the folder on the table but not opening it. She just watched Clara for a long moment, her gaze steady and penetrating. "I know this is difficult, Miss Mitchell," Rossi began, her voice even, "but we need to go over your story again. Sometimes, in moments of trauma, our minds can play tricks on us. We might remember new details." Clara nodded, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. Her performance had not wavered. "Of course. Anything to help catch the man who did this." Rossi leaned forward slightly. "Let's start with the window. You're certain you saw the intruder leave through the window?" "Yes. He was fast. A dark shape. My team found no signs of forced entry on that window, Clara. Or on your front door," Rossi said, using her first name for the first time. A subtle shift from professional to personal. "The crime lab is certain the window was opened from the inside." "How do you explain that?" A flicker of something surprise? Fear? Crossed Clara's face before it was replaced by a look of confusion. I don't know. Maybe Ethan opened it earlier? For some fresh air? The rain. It was a cold, rainy night, Rossi countered smoothly. An odd time to be airing out the apartment. Let's talk about the knife. Ethan was stabbed 60 times. That's a lot of anger, a lot of passion. It seems unusual for a common burglar. Wouldn't you agree? He was a monster, Clara whispered, tears welling up on command. He was trying to kill Ethan. He did kill Ethan, Rossi corrected her gently. And then he took the murder weapon with him. Why? He's already committed murder. He's running. Why risk being caught by carrying a bloody knife through the streets? How would I know? Clara's voice was getting defensive. I'm not a criminal. Rossi opened her folder. She slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture of the butcher block in Clara's kitchen. Our forensic team inventoried your kitchen, Clara. You have a very nice set of Henkel's knives. According to the manufacturer's specifications, the set is supposed to include an 8-inch carving knife. That knife is missing from your block. Do you know where it is? Clara stared at the photo, her composure starting to fray at the edges. Sometimes I misplace things. Maybe it's in the dishwasher. We checked the dishwasher. It's not there, Rossi said calmly. An 8-inch carving knife. The medical examiner says that's consistent with the wounds on Ethan's body. What a coincidence. Clara's breathing was becoming shallow. You're trying to twist things. You're blaming me. I'm just asking questions, Rossi said, her voice never rising. She slid another photograph across the table. It was a luminol-lit photo of the shower drain, glowing an eerie chemical blue. My team also found a significant amount of blood in your shower drain. It was human blood. We're testing it for a DNA match, but I think we both know whose it will be. You told the officers you had just gotten out of the shower when the attack happened. But the evidence suggests someone had a very thorough wash after the attack. Clara shot up from her chair. This is insane. I'm the victim here. My boyfriend was just murdered. And you're treating me like a criminal. I want a lawyer. Rossi didn't flinch. You're not under arrest, Clara. You're free to leave at any time. But I think you and I both know you have nowhere to go where the truth won't follow you. The mention of leaving seemed to pause Clara's outburst. Her mind was racing. If she walked out, she was a person of interest. If she stayed, she was a suspect. Rossi had her trapped. She slowly sank back into her chair. I loved Ethan, she whispered, a desperate, last-ditch appeal to emotion. I believe you did, Rossi said, surprising her. In your own way, but love can get twisted. Can't it? Can turn into obsession. Possession. Rossi decided it was time to introduce a new player. We spoke to Ethan's best friend, a man named Mark Fletcher. At the mention of Mark's name, a look of pure hatred flashed in Clara's eyes. He told us a very different story about your relationship, Rossi continued, watching Clara's reaction closely. He told us you were controlling, that you isolated Ethan from his friends and family. He told us about a faked medical emergency. He told us about how you made Ethan cut off all contact with him. He's a liar, Clara spat, her voice venomous. He was jealous of our love. He always hated me. Did he? Or did he just see what Ethan couldn't? Or maybe what Ethan didn't want to see? Rossi's voice was relentless, chipping away at Clara's defenses. And it's not just Mark. We spoke to Ethan's sister. She told us how you manufactured a reason for Ethan to miss her engagement party. She said he sounded distant, unhappy, in your last few calls. Rossi had saved the best for last. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Clara's. But the most interesting thing we found, Clara, wasn't from a witness. It was from Ethan himself. She reached into the folder and pulled out a small, black moleskine notebook. It was Ethan's journal. The forensic team had found it under a loose floorboard in his officia space. Clara would have had no reason to search. Clara's face went white. She stared at the journal as if it were a venomous snake. We found his journal, Rossi said softly. He wrote everything down. The arguments, your jealousy, the way you controlled him. He wrote about you forcing him to burn his old photographs. He wrote about you making him delete his social media. He wrote about how he felt like he was suffocating. Rossi opened the journal to a bookmarked page. She didn't need to read it. She had memorized it. This is his last entry. It's from yesterday afternoon, just a few hours before he died. Rossi said, her voice now filled with a quiet gravity. She recited the words from memory. Promotion, bonus, should be the happiest day of my career. But I feel nothing. only dread at having to go home and tell her. How will she twist this? How will this become about her? I can't live like this anymore. The cage is beautiful, but it's still a cage. I have to leave. I'm scared. I don't know what she'll do, but I know I have to leave. Tonight. Rossi closed the journal with a soft thud. The sound echoed in the silent room. So you see, Clara, Rossi said, her voice barely a whisper. I know what happened tonight. He came home, and he told you he was leaving. And you couldn't handle that. You couldn't stand the idea of him being free. The idea of losing control. If you couldn't have him, no one could. Isn't that right? The carefully constructed world Clara had built around herself crumbled into dust. The lies, the manipulations, the performance seat was all gone. She was exposed, naked under the harsh, unflinching light of the truth. She stared at the black journal, her last and most damning accuser. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The air in the room crackled. Then, a strange transformation occurred. The fear and panic in her eyes receded, replaced by the same cold, chilling emptiness Ethan had seen just before she attacked him. The mask of the grieving victim fell away, and for the first time, Detective Rossi saw the real Clara Mitchell. A small, bitter smile touched Clara's lips. He was weak, she said, her voice low and full of contempt. It was the first honest thing she had said all night. I gave him everything. I made him the center of my world. All I asked for was the same in return. But he was selfish. He wanted to keep little pieces of himself for everyone else. His family, his pathetic friends, his past. She looked up, her eyes locking with Rossi's. There was no remorse, no regret, only a terrifying, narcissistic rage. He said he was leaving me, she continued, her voice gaining strength, as if the confession were liberating her. After everything I did for him, everything I sacrificed, he was just going to throw me away, like I was trash. I showed him what it really means to leave someone forever. She leaned back in her chair, a strange sense of peace settling over her. The confession was not a tearful breakdown. It was a proud, defiant statement of purpose. It was the chilling monologue of a monster who had finally taken off her human suit. He shouldn't have tried to leave, she said, her voice a near whisper, a final, chilling justification. I loved him too much to let him go. Rossi just stared at her, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She had gotten the confession. The case was closed. But as she looked into Clara's unrepentant eyes, she knew that true justice, the kind that could balance the scales for 60 stab wounds and a stolen life, was something no court in the world could ever truly provide. The trial of Clara Mitchell was not a whodunit. Her chilling, remorseless confession to Detective Rossi had transformed the legal proceedings from a search for a killer into a public autopsy of a diseased relationship. The media dubbed it the porcelain murder, a name that captured the fragile, beautiful facade that had concealed such ugly violence. The courtroom was packed every day with a morbidly curious public, all eager to catch a glimpse of the monster who looked like an angel. Clara's defense team, faced with the insurmountable mountain of her own words, opted for a strategy of mitigation rather than exoneration. They couldn't argue that she didn't do it. They could only argue why she did it. Their narrative painted Clara as a victim of her own mind, a woman suffering from severe, undiagnosed borderline personality disorder and attachment issues. They portrayed her as a fragile soul, terrified of abandonment, who had been pushed over the edge by Ethan's decision to leave. They argued it was not a premeditated act of murder, but a crime of passion, a momentary, tragic explosion of a sick mind. The prosecutor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Vance, systematically dismantled this defense. Her case was built not on emotion, but on a cold, hard timeline of control and escalation. This wasn't a momentary snap, Vance declared in her opening statement, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom. This was the final, brutal act in a long and calculated campaign of psychological terrorism. This was not a crime of passion. This was a crime of possession. The defendant didn't kill Ethan Miller because she loved him too much. She killed him because she couldn't own him completely, and her obsession dictated that if she couldn't have him, no one could. The prosecution's witnesses laid the foundation brick by painstaking brick. Detective Rossi took the stand, her testimony calm and professional, as she recounted the staged crime scene, the inconsistencies in Clara's story, and the final, chilling confession. When Vance played the audio recording of the confession, a palpable wave of revulsion went through the courtroom. To hear the cold, contemptuous tone in Clara's voice as she described Ethan as weak and justified her actions was to hear pure, unadulterated malice. Mark Fletcher testified next. On the stand, Ethan's former best friend was a portrait of grief and guilt. He told the jury about Ethan's change from a happy, outgoing man to a stressed, isolated shadow of his former self. He described Clara's manipulations, the constant phone calls, the faked medical emergency. "I tried to warn him," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked towards the jury. "I saw the leash she had him on. I never thought it would be a garrote." Ethan's sister provided a tearful account of how Clara had alienated Ethan from his own family, twisting their words and actions until he pulled away completely. "She built a wall around him," she cried, "and we couldn't get through. By the time we realized how much danger he was in, it was too late." But the most powerful testimony came from beyond the grave. The prosecutor had Ethan's journal entered into evidence. Selected passages were read aloud by a paralegal, his voice a neutral vessel for Ethan's increasingly desperate words. The jury heard Ethan, in his own voice, describe the suffocation, the fear, the feeling of being trapped in a gilded cage. They heard his final, fateful resolution to leave, his fear of what Clara might do. It was as if Ethan himself were testifying against his killer, his words an eerie, prophetic echo from the past. Throughout the trial, Clara was a study in unsettling composure. She shed no tears. She showed no emotion, save for a faint, dismissive sneer when Mark or Ethan's sister spoke. She spent most of the time sketching intricate, abstract patterns on a legal pad, seemingly bored by the proceedings. Her detachment was more damning than any outburst could have been. It spoke of a profound lack of empathy, a soul-deep inability to recognize the humanity of the man she had slaughtered. During the defense's presentation, a psychiatrist testified that Clara's actions were consistent with a dissociative episode triggered by her fear of abandonment. But on cross-examination, Vance eviscerated his testimony. "Doctor, did the defendant express any remorse to you for her actions?" Vance asked. "She expressed regret for the situation," the psychiatrist said evasively. "That's not what I asked," Vance pressed. "Did she say, 'I regret killing Ethan Miller'? Did she show any empathy for the 60 stab wounds she inflicted upon him?" "Her emotional expressions are blunted," he conceded. "Or non-existent?" Vance countered. "Is it not also true, doctor, that her behavior staging the crime scene, creating a detailed alibi, feigning grief for hours to Policius more consistent with a cold, calculating, and narcissistic mind than with someone in a dissociative state?" The psychiatrist had no convincing answer. In her closing argument, Vance stood before the jury, holding a single, stark crime scene photo of Ethan's body. She only showed it for a moment, but it was enough. "Look at this," she said, her voice dropping to a somber, powerful register. "This is not the result of a fragile mind breaking. This is the result of a monstrous ego refusing to be denied. 60 times. 60 wounds. Each one a testament not to love, but to rage. Each one a message. You do not belong to yourself. You belong to me. Do not be fooled by the defendant's calm demeanor or the story of a troubled mind. Look at the evidence. Listen to Ethan's words from his own journal. He saw the storm coming. He tried to escape. What you see before you is not a victim. She is a predator. And she is asking you to let her get away with the ultimate act of ownership." The jury was out for less than 4 hours. The verdict was read in a hushed courtroom. On the charge of first-degree murder, guilty. A wave of relief and quiet sobs went through the gallery where Ethan's family and friends sat. Clara Mitchell, however, did not react. She simply stared straight ahead, her expression unchanged, as if she were listening to a weather report. She blinked once, slowly, then turned her head to look at her lawyer with mild annoyance, as if he had failed her in some minor, inconvenient way. There was no flicker of fear, no hint of despair. Just the same chilling emptiness that had been there all along. At her sentencing, Ethan's mother stood to give a victim impact statement. She spoke not of hatred for Clara, but of the vast, unending void left by her son's murder. "You didn't just take my son's life," she said, her voice trembling but strong as she looked directly at the impassive Clara. "You took his future. You took our future with him. You took every birthday, every holiday, every laugh we would have shared. And for what? For your pride? Your ego? I will never understand the darkness in your heart. But I hope that every day, for the rest of your life, when you close your eyes, you see his face. And you see what you threw away." Clara did not flinch. She did not even look at the grieving mother. She was still sketching on her notepad. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, a reporter shouted, "Clara, do you have anything to say?" She paused for a moment, turning her head slightly. A faint, enigmatic smile touched her lips. "Art is pain," she said softly, and then she was gone. The story of Ethan and Clara became a cautionary tale, a dark fable for the modern age about the dangers lurking behind a perfect social media profile and the deadly nature of obsessive love. Detective Rossi closed the case file, but the images from apartment 12B would never truly leave her. Sometimes, late at night, she would think about the number 60, a number so extreme it defied comprehension. It was the number of times Clara had to make the conscious decision to raise her hand and bring it down again. It was the number that measured the terrifying, fathomless depth of the abyss that could open up between two people who once claimed to be in love. The echoes of that night, of the Crimson Symphony and the silent scream, would linger long after the courtroom had emptied and the headlines had faded, a permanent stain on the memory of all who had touched the case.